So moving on to item B, public comment. Are there members of the public that would like to speak on a non-listed agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move to item C, approval of summary actions from the March 20th, 2014 meeting. There's an attachment. Do you have any questions or comments? Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll move we approve it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those any opposed? Okay. All right. Let's see. So consent calendar. Moving on to the approval of the consent calendar. Any questions or comments? Okay. Moving on. Any motions?
Move approval. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passed unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 4 on the regular items, project monitoring, upcoming obligation deadlines for federal aid projects, and status of projects placed on FHWA quarterly inactive lists. Staff will provide an update.
Good afternoon, committee members. Your monthly project monitoring and status report is in front of you. Just a couple of things to highlight on the STIP status report. This report now reflects the 2014 STIP programmed projects that are a result of action taken by the California Transportation Commission on March 20th. So you'll see a new list, some existing projects, some new projects listed in the 2014 report. The same delivery rules apply, which are on the second page of the STIP program status report. So these will be monitored for this program of projects moving forward. Any questions on that specific report? And then moving on to the federal aid project status report, once again, as a reminder, those are separated by fiscal year. And for the fiscal year 2014 projects, we've been working with the agencies to track the good work you're doing with Caltrans local assistance to get those projects obligated. And as a reminder, per the regional delivery guidelines and Caltrans procedures, April 30th is the key day to actually get your funds obligated via an E76 from Caltrans. Most agencies are well on their way towards that deadline. There are a few that we remain in contact with to get those funds obligated, but everybody's doing a great job of keeping on the pressure to get those projects moving forward. Any questions for those? And then last but not least, on the inactive obligations list, just an item to note that the next action date for any resubmittals or original submittals is May 20th, as shown on the Caltrans monthly inactive obligation report. Any questions? And that concludes my report.
So that was an information item, no action requested. So we're moving on to item 5, Senate Bill 743 update.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're back with an update, or somewhat of an update, on Senate Bill 743. We brought this item to you back in February when we were preparing a comment letter from the authority to the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, known as OPR, on SB 743. In case you weren't here in February or haven't heard about Senate Bill 743, what it does is it requires OPR to develop new guidelines for changes in CEQA under Senate Bill 743. Basically, what it 743 did is it removed CEQA as a finding of significance, it removed level of service as a finding of significance under CEQA, in a CEQA document. So any measure of vehicle delay could not be used as a finding of significance in CEQA, and level of service is the main measure of vehicle delay that we're all accustomed to. So we did, based on the feedback we got from you guys in February, we then took it to the planning committee and the board and prepared a letter from the authority to OPR, and that's in your packet, starting on page 5.4. We put this on the agenda this month hoping we'd have some new information on the guidelines that are being developed by OPR staff. We really don't have any new concrete information. I've been meeting with OPR staff as part of the regional modeling working group. We also meet as a subcommittee to the CMA planning directors, a special committee on SB 743, and OPR staff has been coming up to meet with all the Bay Area representatives, and they've been kind of bouncing ideas off of us and getting our feedback, and I think they've been really using the Bay Area group as a way to help shape their guidelines. But basically what they told us a couple weeks ago at the last meeting was that they are leaning towards this SB 743 being applied not just in transit priority areas, as is stated in the Senate bill. The Senate bill also leaves it open to areas outside of transit priority areas, anywhere in the county, in the state, and they are leaning towards that. So we have a strong feeling that SB 743 will be applicable everywhere, including places that have no transit. And that was what the focus of our letter was, not really on the new metric, but on the applicability of 743 outside of transit priority areas. So we said we made our case, but they're probably going the other direction. They also indicated that VMT in one way or another will be the new measure that they will be using in place of level of service. Whether it'll be straight VMT or VMT per capita, we're not sure, but it'll probably be one of those two. OPR will not be setting thresholds for the new criteria. That will be left up to the lead agency on the CEQA document. So, thresholds will be determined at the local level. And I didn't mention this on here, but in terms of tools that would be used to measure VMT, should VMT be the new criteria? They haven't decided on that yet, whether it would be something that would be modeled using the county models or using MTC's regional model, or whether it would be kind of an off-model tool. We're not sure. MTC is going to start by preparing maps of all the TPAs in the Bay Area, so at least everyone will be aware of where those are. But like OPR said, it'll probably be applicable outside of TPAs as well, so those maps may or may not be useful. MTC is also thinking of creating kind of some VMT maps based on location, so locations that tend to produce more VMT than others. Generally the areas further out and further away from transit are going to produce more VMT, but at least we'll have some maps that can be used for, if there was an off-model tool to determine the VMT, those maps would probably be the first step. So that's really all we know. That's what we've gleaned from OPR in the last 2 meetings. We'll be meeting with them monthly, and the new guidelines for the new criteria are due July 1st. So definitely we'll be coming back to you in July. I don't think we'll be coming back to you between now and then, but we will be coming back in July, and we'll be rolling out the new guidelines that OPR produces July 1st. So if you guys have any major concerns you want related to OPR, or you want, or any questions you have.
Okay, go ahead.
Could you walk us through how per capita VMT would be used to analyze the project's impact?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially, we're not sure. I don't know, Brad, do you have any insights into that? I mean, really, we're not sure. We're kind of as in the dark as everybody else. I think by July 1st, all of a sudden, there's going to be a ton of information out there. But right now, they've given us some hints, but they haven't, certainly haven't given us any detailed methodology or anything like that.
I'm not sure if that's going to be helpful or not, but I mean, one could analogize to what we do now with level of service. Some of the mitigation measures that you come up with are meant to mitigate the problems at the intersection. They're not necessarily related just to vehicle movement, because the level of service does affect movement by bicyclists and pedestrians in transit. So a mitigation might be something that one might not necessarily think comes out of analysis of level of service. With VMT per capita, you might say, well, more vehicles traveling more miles means some kind of impact on maintaining the roadways. I mean, that's a direct impact that would affect the way your maintenance needs. So if you this would maybe relate more directly to a fee that one might impose on a project. So I could see that as one way of using VMT per capita. What OPR is going to suggest, we don't know, though.
Matt, I had a couple questions. You mentioned that the VMT, if it's adopted, those thresholds will be adopted by each jurisdiction. And the question that I have is, has CCTA given any, or MTC given any thought to the regional concept of establishing more of a regional VMT, for example, Central County area or SWAT or WICTAC, just because each geographical area kind of serves a different kind of population, the transit opportunities to do that. And I guess more of what I'm concerned about is in a situation like what we have across the street, where we have potentially one jurisdiction, which may be the county, establishing a VMT for projects adjacent to the BART station here, but Walnut Creek, as an example, adjacent to that, having a separate VMT threshold, and potentially having that conflict where right now we look at routes of regional significance and we kind of acknowledge that this isn't just these aren't just city routes, these are regional routes that could impact the region. And so I guess, if they do decide to go this route, if OPR goes this route, has there been any discussion or consideration on us trying to form together our own individual kind of regional VMT? That would be the first question. And the second one is more of it how it pertains to jurisdictions when new development comes forward and we do establish whatever those thresholds are. If we exceed those thresholds outside of paying a fee, it gets complicated when when a local project triggers an impact that's far away from a transit, but yet, you know, cities aren't transit providers by nature. We have no control over whether or not the what kind of capacity they have, or other regional bus, you know, agencies. So I guess the question is have there been, in developing this idea, this concept, has there been any thought as to how we could even mitigate an impact if one was to be found?
I'll start with your first question. CCTA we haven't started thinking about establishing thresholds locally, but, you know, once the new guidelines are out, we probably will have to update our technical procedures and provide some sort of local context, you know, guidelines. But, you know, I think we're holding off till we see exactly what they come up with. MTC has talked about, not necessarily in terms of establishing thresholds, but they have talked about doing some analysis at the census tract level, which that's MTC, that's the geography they work with. So that wouldn't necessarily be helpful in a location like across the street, which is probably in the middle of a census tract. So yeah, I think we would probably have to do something a bit more detailed for the county. What that would look like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I think we will have to do something in our technical procedures to provide, you know, when people are doing traffic impact reports, they'll have to have some guidelines on how to establish these thresholds. But I think really we're just waiting to see what the final outcome is before we start moving forward, and same with MTC. In regards to your second question, now I've completely forgotten it. Mitigation. Yeah, that one is a tough one as well.
These are going to be questions, you know, as we're trying to have an official response to OPR. They're asking for some comments, and so I think it's important to make sure that jurisdictions fully understand on if there's thresholds going to be adopted, you know, what guidance can they provide to local developers or to their own planning staff on how to go about implementing this mitigation outside of a fee that goes into, you know, and maybe it goes into some sort of, you know, TDM program. I don't know, but I was just more or less curious as to what consideration has been given to that, and if you've heard of any other agency or jurisdiction having the same inquiry about what happens if that threshold's been exceeded.
And that's what I was going to say. The questions that you're asking are the same questions that are coming up from all across the Bay Area. And I put a link in at the end of the board letter to all the comment letters that have been received by OPR. I haven't looked at them all. I think there's about 80 or so. They're all asking the same types of questions. You know, you need to provide guidance on thresholds. You need, you know, how are we going to provide mitigations for, you know, transportation related impacts, for development related impact. You know, people are very concerned about those same questions. So I think based on those, OPR is going to have to provide, you know, some pretty significant guidance.
I think Lynn had a question, did you?
Sounds like all this is tied around CEQA documents. Is there any reason for return to source money, gas tax money, that if we so chose as a group of Contra Costa County, that we couldn't have something different than CEQA that would be required, that all the cities and the county could buy into for if we wanted something else as our triggers for mitigations from our developers?
I mean, we do have that through, you know, the action plans and the MTSOs and the GMP in general, and that really isn't affected by this. You know, the 743 does state that, you know, level of service still can be used in local planning documents. And so, you know, we still plan on, you know, I think we do still plan on using what we've got in the action plans going forward. You know, when it's a CEQA, when CEQA is triggered on a project, then all bets are off. But, you know, in terms of just mitigating local development on a smaller type project, you know, you can definitely defer to the action plans.
So it sounds like the traffic study, almost we need a secret document with all that stuff and then something different to deal with what we've all agreed to, so.
Yes, and if you were to do a general plan, say, and you looked at what happens with the growth in the pattern that you have in your general plan, and you use low level of service to identify the kinds of improvements to the roadway network, that your roadway network, that's acceptable. The 743 doesn't change that. It's only when you have to do a CEQA document, that's when you can't use level of service to find a significant impact. So if you're using your CEQA documents for identifying mitigations for a particular development project, yes, then you can't, that's where you can't use level of service. Now, how you mitigate, if the impact is miles traveled, how does a particular development project mitigate that? If the impact is traveling more miles, how do you stop traveling so many miles? That's the implication of using vehicle miles traveled. And how you do that if you're going to approve a development, that's a question that I don't think OPR has answered.
I think Paul's been waiting, so and then John, yeah.
Yeah, I just also wanted to comment that it's also we would also have to do level of service when we have to do NEPA. This doesn't affect NEPA, so it's in addition to all those other where we require level of service. And my question is the guidelines come out or rolled out in July or scheduled to. Well, do we have any idea when this would apply to how we do a study?
I mean,
when it would be required?
From what I've heard, the requirements won't kick in until sometime in 2015.
15? Okay. Gives us some time. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, following up on Jeremy's question and comment regarding how to mitigate, and as far as transit goes, OPR and I think it was Fair and Peers who seemed to be helping out with their analysis on this. They had a webinar last month and discussed this, and their very question came up, and one of the responses, and everything's speculative at this point, even with the experts. But one proposal that came up was that you would have, with the development, you would have a transit program that was specifically focused on that particular development. And the county in, God, I don't even know when it was, 2009 maybe it was approved, 2008. We approved a development out in Alamo Creek, out Camino Tasajara, and with that development, we put in place a transit service area. So each parcel is assessed annually a fee for transit service. And that service just started this year, and right now there's two services that are funded with that. One is school bus service, San Ramon Valley School Bus Program Traffics, and then another service, some type of flex service that County Connection is providing. And so that, I guess, to answer your question, that would help to mitigate vehicle miles traveled. But you mentioned, Jeremy, that the cities and county don't control transit service. I guess you can indirectly if you contract out and fund with a specific mechanism.
Yeah, and my only reference to that would be that it gets complicated in an urban environment where we have very small project by project infill, and to burden one individual developer with the full cost of transit would be an inordinate amount of impact. So I'm just, and there obviously whatever fee needs to get assessed, if it is a fee-based type program that gets rolled into transit, would have to be something that would be uniformly understood and somehow similar to any kind of traffic impact fee.
Yeah,
So.
I guess building on that, because this development, I mean, it's way out on the fringe, it had to be new, absolutely new service. So the fee is fairly substantial. If you're in the core, it's just going to be an increment of that because you're in existing active service areas.
Yeah, that all works great on paper. Has anybody counted how many people are on that bus? No, has someone gone out and seen the 6 people who ride this bus on a daily basis? Or is it full and is it actually working?
The traffic program, a lot of the buses are fully subscribed. The County Connection service, I don't know, has it started yet, Laramie?
Which one?
The County Connection service funded with the CSA T1 dollars.
I'm not sure. CSAT.
The Alamo Creek Transit District funding?
Yeah, it has started.
Okay.
It's been good so far.
It's been good?
Yeah, I don't have subscription numbers.
Okay.
So, but it is working.
Yeah, the school bus program does really well, and it does, it's been established that it does improve level of service. So, VMT,
Any other questions or comments? Okay, there was no action requested. So moving on to item 6, draft vision, goals, and strategies for the 2014 countywide transportation plan. There's a attachment and a staff report.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to provide you all with an update on where we're going with the countywide transportation plan. We're in the midst of that. You have all been working on your action plans, and we are trying to get started on putting together those plans into a countywide plan. This time around, I think many of you have heard, we are also going to be putting together a transportation expenditure plan for a potential new measure that we would bring to the voters in 2016. One of the things that we do as part of our countywide plan, as something that you all do with your general plans, is to have, some of you have visions. I think many of you do. We have one too. We have revised it, the authority revised it in February. They also revised their goals, and those are included in your document. We have a new goal this time around, which is continue to invest wisely to maximize the benefits of available funding. It's been an unstated goal since the authority has been in existence since 1989, and this just is 25 years. And this is just a real explicit statement of that approach. The authority considered the strategies that are in your packet tonight. They want to look at them one more time. They made some additional changes to them, especially on, let's see, which ones did they change? They like our fixing the grammar on 2.7. Something on 1.4, they wanted us to reword that to note that our countywide plan will be consistent with the countywide general plans of local jurisdictions. They want to clarify that on 3.7 that we're not just talking about what MTC and ABAG designate as community of concern, but the types of people who make up that designation. So elderly people, no matter where they are, disabled people, households without cars, wherever they are in the county, et cetera. So we, the staff, are kind of interested in on some of these strategies. If you see any issues with them or certain things that you think that we should be thinking about when we put together the plan as ways to carry out those strategies. We have a limited amount of fun. It's a disco at the TCC. Are there ways that some of these strategies are more important, or are there some issues that you think we should be cognizant of when we're putting together the plan? You know, there are the 5 goals. One is to support efficient, and the authority wanted to add safe, efficient, safe, and reliable movement of people. The second is to manage growth. The third is to encourage alternatives to single occupant vehicle. Fourth is maintenance of the system, and the fifth is, as I mentioned earlier, to invest wisely. And these are all strategies to carry out those 5 goals. So, if you have any concerns or questions or suggestions, we're happy to hear them.
Jeremy?
Just a quick question, Brad. Has there been any consideration to, I know one of the goals here is to work with local jurisdictions and other agencies to develop a connected and coordinated network for electric vehicles. I know 501's been working pretty diligently on something like that. Has there been any consideration given, since the East Bay is now being included as part of bike share, to actually including some sort of regional bike share program for the county, or is that?
You know, there is interest, and we have heard about expanding bike share, especially along the Iron Horse Trail. The authority did make a tweak to that particular strategy and changed it from electric vehicles to alternative fuel vehicles, so that they can include natural gas powered vehicles as well, which don't have they could use a much more expanded and broader network of fueling stations, as well as electric charging stations. That's not something that we've brought up or anyone has brought up yet. I will write it down and see if we can work it in.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So no action requested on that item as well. So we'll move on to item 7, PDA planning grant call for projects.
Yes, last month you saw the PDA strategy, and the strategy included in it an appendix on guidelines for the PDA planning grants. This month, we're bringing you a draft call for projects. We incorporated the suggestions that you made, changes in the weighting. Those are also included in the PDA strategy that the authority approved last night. So what we have is a call for projects, schedule, background, eligibility. We've changed, as you suggested, so that the minimum stays at $75,000, but we reduce the maximum to $700,000. Required local match, recommended planning elements, where some clarification that you asked for, we've made on those. Potential planning activities, that's a much expanded list that we added. The screening criteria are the same, but we've made a lot of changes and I hope clarifications with in part 2, which are the evaluation criteria. We changed the weighting as you suggested last time around. And it also includes attachment 2, which are the descriptions of the planning elements. Excuse me, allergies. That are in that MTC has established. And the reason we include those is because there is a statement, and you'll see it on page 7-2 in the packet. Thank you if I sneeze. There's a statement under local PDA planning and implementation. This is from Resolution 4335, which established this program. CMA grants to local jurisdictions and expenditure funds by the San Francisco Planning Department Interestingly, San Francisco, the money goes to the planning department and not to the CMA, are to be aligned with the recommendations on the PDA strategy, as well as to the PDA planning program guidelines as they apply only to those activities relevant to those guidelines, which is an odd way of saying it, but if you, for example, are going to do community involvement as part of your PDA planning grant, then you have to follow the guidelines that are listed on page 715, which are the MPC guidelines. If you're going to do a PDA profile, then you're supposed to follow the guidelines that are on page 714, et cetera. So that's why they're in the call for projects. And following that, there is the draft application. We have a deadline of July 18th at 5 p.m. It's a Friday. There's the date, project name, applicant, contact info, local match, agreement, local support. That will be an attachment that you'd provide. And then description of the PDA, description of the purpose for the project, description of the scope of the project, relationship to other PDA planning that's gone on or is planned to go on within that PDA. Then relationship to the recommended planning elements. There could be no relationship, or there could be that it's going to complete that planning element, or it's going to be a follow-on to something that you've already done in your PDA. And that's background, and then there's the funding request, and then the criteria that are listed, and then attachments. So that's the proposed call for projects, and if you have any suggested changes.
No suggested changes. I was curious if is it a scoring committee? Has that met yet, and are they going to review this?
They haven't met yet.
But they will review the application?
They will review the application, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? So you are asking for the authority, for the committee to recommend, to review and recommend to the authority the release of the call for projects.
Yes.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those against? All right, unanimously approved. Moving on to item 8, MTC report card on the One Bay Area Grant Program.
We're putting this in for information. It's MTC's review of what happened as part of OBAG. This report is mostly about the bureaucratic aspects of it. Did everyone follow the process? Did the CMAs do what they were supposed to? Did the local jurisdictions meet the requirements? The local jurisdictions were required to have a HCD certified housing element, and with the approvals of HCD of the Hercules and Orinda housing elements, then yay, all 20 jurisdictions met that. Only one jurisdiction in the region has not yet, and that's the city of Albany. Every jurisdiction had to have either a general plan that complied with the Complete Streets Act of 2008 or have adopted a Complete Streets resolution that met MTC's model. 9 of the jurisdictions said their general plan complied with the act, and 11 decided to adopt a resolution. For the next round of OBAG, OBAG 2 or whatever they're going to be calling it, there will be more stringent, maybe not more stringent, but The requirements will be that every jurisdiction by the end of January of next year will have to have updated their general plan so that it complies with the Complete Streets Act of 2008. So those 11 jurisdictions who said the general plan or implied that their general plan didn't comply and chose the resolution route will have to update their circulation element to comply with the Complete Streets Act. Also, every jurisdiction by January 31st, 2015 will have to get HC certification for their housing element for the new RENA numbers. That's the 2014-2022 RENA. MTC thinks that's going to be a piece of cake because in many instances, the jurisdiction's allocation of housing need is lower than it was for the initial or the preceding RENA. It's not true in every case, though. So there will be some jurisdictions that will have to amend their housing element to find ways to meet those higher numbers. MTC, in most cases, thought that all the CMAs did a good job of carrying out their responsibilities of allocating the funds appropriately. There's a listing on the second page of the board letter, which compares the share of funding in Contra Costa to the share of funding in the region for these 5 different categories that the funding could be given out to. So we didn't give out as much money as a share for bike ped. We gave out more for local streets and roads. We gave out about the same for planning, a little less. We didn't give out any safe routes to school. There was a separate safe routes to school category. And we gave up a little bit more for TLC. So that's the report. There's a lot more detail in the report itself. MPC is going to start talking about the next OBAG program internally this fall and publicly in the winter and spring of next year. So I'm guessing maybe the end of 2015 we'll have another call for projects.
Heather?
I had a couple questions. I heard today at City County Engineers meeting that the CCTA board said that they didn't, and I'm paraphrasing, they didn't like the way that the OBEG money was dispersed, or they hoped it would be more evenly spread or something like that, and so I wondered if you could clarify that comment. And then going back to the complete streets, so for the 9 that did get the determination that their general plan was in compliance, you would assume that in next OBEGs, or maybe I should ask the question, so in the next cycle, you would assume that that is still carries, right? That you don't have to do anything more to your general plan.
No, you do have to do something more on your
Oh, you
general
do?
plan. If you adopted a resolution.
No, so if you were the 9 that said your general plan already.
Oh, yes, you don't have to
Yeah.
do any more.
Okay.
And it is really self-certification unless MTC decides they want to go in and check on every general.
Didn't we have to write a letter and they confirmed it or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was something. I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
they might, maybe they'll have this, require the city attorney send a letter saying that we believe that our general plan complies with the Complete Streets of 2008.
So just to clarify, we're saying that that the cities that certify that their general plan already meets complete streets, they're not specifically going to be required to amend their circulation element.
The requirement will be that by January 31st, 2015, every jurisdiction will have a general plan that complies with the Complete Streets Act of 2008. If you already think you do, then you don't have to do anything. If you think you don't, then obviously you do.
John?
Oh, I haven't answered first of Heather's questions. The issue that came up, and it's come up before, was that every jurisdiction got some money through OBAG because we split the money up for local streets. All the STP, some of the STP money went for planning, but majority of it went for local streets and roads. And every jurisdiction got some of that local streets and roads money. There was CMAQ money and a little TE money, which has gone away now. It's now STIP money. But that money was allocated by using criteria, and some parts of the county got more money than others. One part of the county got no money through that competitive portion. And the representatives of jurisdictions from that part of the county felt that that went against the Contra Costa Transportation Authority way of providing geographic equity, however one might define that. So there was a discussion about that, and the idea is that the authority wants to be able to look at the scoring for any next round, including the PDA planning grant round, to ensure that there is some kind of equitable way of allocating the funds.
Isn't that the whole point of One Bay Area grant, that it's not the peanut butter spread evenly?
That is what MTC has said to us on a number of occasions. There is no explicit prohibition against using geographic equity in the allocation of the funds, but I think that MTC would say that they didn't think they needed to have an explicit prohibition, that the factors that they required us to consider should have been used without any consideration of where the locations and the subregions.
Okay, John?
Going back to the complete streets compliance and the general plan, the county did a general plan revision prior to the Complete Streets Act passing, and some of the spirit, intent, and a lot of the content is the same or similar to the Complete Streets Act, but it doesn't have the kind of explicit elements that were established after the Complete Streets Act passed. I talked to Sean Coe last year when this came up, and at that time he said, yeah, you guys are probably consistent, you don't need to pass a resolution, but he was silent on in future years whether or not we would have to pass a more comprehensive general plan amendment to be consistent. And that was the last time I talked to him, so that was probably over a year ago now. Have you heard anything from them that has them locking it down yet again even further?
No, we haven't heard anything. I don't expect to really hear anything until January or later next year. I think they may talk to us and ask us some questions about, interview us and what we think went right and what went wrong and what we think are some issues. But part of the reason why we brought this to you today is so that you can think about what are the good and bad aspects, or what parts of OBAG worked well and what parts didn't work quite so well. I believe that MTC will continue to focus on PDAs, and they will continue to try to focus on PDAs that have the best, where the money would do the most to encourage development. And someone said that there are some PDAs that don't need any help. There are some PDAs that no amount of money will help, and there are other PDAs that a little bit of money can do a lot of good. And I think that's where MTC would like the money to go. And how they change the OBAG criteria and guidelines to make that happen, I don't know. and whether they'll make the requirements for the Complete Streets Act more explicit and require that your update was completed after the legislation came into force, or I don't know what they're going to do.
I had a question comment on Table 6 of the MTC report. I was surprised to see that the number of projects with complete streets elements was so low in Contra Costa County compared to all the other counties. Do you have more information on that? Or what did they count as complete streets elements, and why did so few of our projects qualify?
I don't know exactly. I thought the number should have been higher myself. But if the project description explicitly included complete streets components, or like the Detroit Avenue project, the name was Detroit Avenue Complete Streets, and that was counted as a complete streets project, not surprisingly. So I think that some of the local streets projects were actually included in that. I think they didn't. Here's an example. They haven't told me which projects they were, but my guess is that the BART project at the Richmond BART station, which improved the pedestrian pathway through the transit area at the southwest side of the BART station, they didn't include that as a complete streets project because it wasn't on a street. It was part of the BART plan, part area. And I think there are some other projects that you might think should have been counted, but they didn't for whatever reason.
But MTC didn't make a comment specifically to Contra Costa about how we are underperforming?
No.
Okay.
No. But I think the implication is that they think we are.
Okay.
I mean, we're obviously the lowest when you look at that.
Heather?
Just to follow up on that question, do you know if the other counties did a local streets and roads contribution or money right off the top to all their cities and county? I'm just wondering if that
I think there
skews the
might have
numbers.
been one other, and I can't remember which one it is. But we're sort of outliers on that. And that was because in the CMA Block Grant, which was the predecessor to OBAG, the authority decided they would give the local streets and roads money to the biggest jurisdictions, Walnut Creek, Concord, Richmond, Antioch, and then give the smaller jurisdictions their share in the OBAG cycle. But then they changed all the rules, so it kind of left us in a funny place. And that's and then local jurisdictions, including representatives here at TCC, said, would it be really great if we could get more local street maintenance money, because we don't have it, especially with the downturn in the economy. And those are the reasons why we decided to take all the STIP money pretty much and put it to local streets.
Okay, I think there was no action requested on this item. So we're moving on to item 9. We're adjourning the meeting to the next regular meeting on May 15th at 2:30.
Could I ask a question? You may have heard that Caltrans just approved the use of the NACTO guidelines for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and I'm interested if TCC members or you think CSAC members might be interested in getting more information about those guidelines.
Yeah, so you're potentially going to make a presentation on those guidelines
Either
at the next meeting?
Either that or we've been having text series on different things, and maybe having a broader text series that would be open to any engineers or planners in Contra Costa would be interested in that kind of that information on what there's a lot of information on signage and wayfinding and bikes boxes and early signals for bicycles and those sorts of standards.
Sounds,
Let me look into that.
thank you. Okay, we're adjourned. Thanks.